A dump truck lifts its bed at the edge of an old oilfield lease, and rusted production tubing starts sliding out behind it, hammering into a pile that already reaches above the men standing nearby. Two roughnecks laugh as a woman steps into the mess, pulls one joint clear with both hands, and drags it away from the pile. To them, she is fighting over scrap nobody wants. Before taking another piece, she runs a cordless grinder across one rusted section. Orange scale disappears under the wheel, sparks scatter across the dirt, and a strip of solid gray steel appears underneath. The surface is ugly, but the wall beneath it is still thick. She rolls that joint away from the damaged ones and marks it. The tubing has been pulled from several old marginal wells being plugged across the lease, and nearly 500 usable and unusable sections have accumulated over several weeks. Their lengths are mixed, many threaded ends are crushed or corroded, and none of it can be trusted for pressure service anymore. Sorting it and hauling it to scrap is barely worth the trouble, so when she asks for it, the foreman has little reason to argue. Instead of sending the next loads toward the scrap buyer, the contractor begins dropping them at her farm. By the time the first load hits her yard, the material looks worse up close. Some sections are bowed, others have flattened ends, and almost nothing matches perfectly. She starts separating them anyway, measuring straight sections, rolling damaged pieces aside, and cutting a ruined threaded end back to clean steel with a cut-off saw. Then she lays one usable section beside the thin tubing from an old farm gate she has repaired before. The difference is hard to miss. The oilfield tubing is heavier, thicker, and far stiffer. She measures 4 straight pieces, chalks matching cut marks across them, and carries the first set toward her workshop. Before the pile can be worth anything, she has to find out whether those 4 pieces can become a gate that actually works. Inside the workshop, the first problem is simply keeping the material still. The round tubing wants to roll as soon as she lays it down, so she blocks each section with scrap wood and clamps the first 2 pieces to the table. Before making a weld, she measures across both diagonals of the rectangle and shifts the corners until the numbers match. One section looks usable until she brings it into position. The end has been flattened slightly during removal, leaving it oval enough that the corner will not fit cleanly. She marks the pipe beyond the damaged area, cuts back to clean round steel with a cut-off wheel, then adjusts the matching piece so the dimensions stay even. The free material is already costing her something the oilfield crew did not want to spend: time. Once the 4 outside pieces line up, she clamps the corners and tack welds the frame together. Welding heat pulls one corner just far enough to change her diagonal measurement, so she cuts the tack loose, pulls the frame back into square, and tries again. This time, the measurements hold. She begins fitting horizontal rails through the center, measuring each gap before tacking the next piece into place. By the end of the afternoon, what had been 4 rusted sections of oilfield tubing is standing upright as a full gate frame. The welds still need finishing, and it has no hinges or latch yet, but the size is right. She moves it from the workshop to her corral and sets it against the posts beside the old gate she intends to replace. The new frame fills the opening almost exactly. Getting the dimensions right was one thing. Now she had to hang all that weight from one side and see whether it would still swing and close like a gate. She finishes the remaining welds on the gate frame, then smooths the roughest edges with a grinder so nothing along the rails can catch a hide or a hand. On the hinge side, she welds 2 heavy lugs directly to the round upright, spacing them to match the steel hinge pins on the corral post. At the opposite end, she fits a simple slide bolt and marks where its keeper needs to sit. The finished frame is too heavy to hold in position while lining up the hinges, so she stacks wood blocks beneath the latch end and uses them to carry most of the weight. With the gate supported, she eases the hinge side toward the post, works the upper lug over its pin, then adjusts the blocks until the lower one drops into place. Only after both hinges are seated does she remove the supports. The latch end stays clear of the ground. She pulls the gate through its full swing. It moves more slowly than the lightweight gate it replaced, but there is no dragging or binding. At the closed position, she finds the keeper sitting slightly off-center, moves it about half an inch, and tries again. This time, the gate reaches the post cleanly, and the bolt slides into place. Over the next several days, she begins using it instead of treating it like a prototype. Cattle move from one pen to another while she opens the gate, swings it closed behind them, and drops the latch each time. She checks the welds after the first few uses and pushes against the closed frame to see whether anything shifts. Nothing obvious does. By the end of the week, the rusted tubing is no longer sitting in a pile or lying across her workshop floor. One part of it is doing an ordinary job in the corral, opening and closing every time the cattle move through. One morning, after moving cattle through the corral, the slide bolt no longer drops into its keeper the way it did before. She has to lift the latch end nearly an inch before the bolt will line up. She checks the obvious things first. The hinge pins are still seated, the welds are intact, and the keeper hasn't come loose. But as soon as she lets the full weight settle again, the free corner drops back down. Over the next several days, the change becomes harder to ignore. Cattle crowd against the closed gate while waiting to move, rubbing and leaning on the rails the way they always have. Nothing charges it, and nothing breaks suddenly. The repeated pressure simply keeps working against a long, heavy frame supported from one side, and the top rail begins to slope toward the latch post. Soon, she is lifting the gate higher every time she wants the bolt to catch. She lays a level across the top rail, then pulls a tape across both diagonals, using the same checks she made when the frame was first welded square. This time, the measurements are no longer equal. One diagonal is nearly 2 inches different from the other, and the rectangle has slowly racked out of shape. She starts loosening the latchkeeper to move it lower, then stops. Following the sag with the latch would only hide the problem. She lifts the gate off its hinge pins, loads the sagged frame onto her trailer, and drives a few miles to a rancher who has been building and repairing working gates for years. He sets the gate down in his yard, sights along the sloping top rail, checks the hinge side, and studies the outline of the frame before touching a single weld. The first thing he points to is not where anything broke. It is the shape she built in the first place. He walks her over to one of his own long gates that has stayed square through years of regular cattle use. Running from the bottom hinge corner toward the upper latch corner is a solid diagonal brace, and the hinge attachments are backed with welded steel plates. He points from one corner of her sagged frame to the other. The tubing itself is still sound, and the welds have held. The problem is the shape. A large plain rectangle can slowly rack sideways under its own weight and repeated pressure, while a diagonal brace divides that frame into 2 much more rigid triangles. Back in her workshop, she does not scrap the gate and start over. She uses a ratchet strap and blocks to pull the dropped corner back into position, checking both diagonal measurements as the frame comes square again. Once the numbers match, she cuts a straight section of tubing to run from the bottom hinge corner to the upper latch corner, fits it tightly, tack welds it, checks the measurements once more, and finishes the welds. She also adds gusset plates around the hinge lug areas so the load is spread across more of the upright. When she hangs the gate again, the top rail sits level and the latch corner holds its height without being lifted. The bolt enters the keeper cleanly, and the gate swings through its full arc without dragging. But her own corral had looked convincing once before. She takes the rebuilt gate to a neighboring working ranch during a busy sorting day. Cattle crowd against the rails while waiting to move. Several animals rub along the closed frame, and one heavier animal leans into the latch side. After the pen clears, she checks the same points that failed before. The top rail is still level, the latch has not dropped, and when she swings the gate shut, the bolt slides straight into its keeper without being lifted. The neighboring rancher walks the length of the gate once more, runs a hand along the diagonal brace, then swings it open and shuts it himself. He does not make much of it. He simply asks what she would charge for a gate built the same way. then tells her about another rancher he sees at the local sale barn who has been fighting a bent gate on his loading pen for nearly 2 years. A few days later, that rancher calls. His old gate has sagged far enough that he has to lift the latch end every time cattle move through, and he wants something heavier before the problem gets worse. She drives over, measures the opening herself, checks the posts, then works out what the job will actually cost: hinge hardware, welding consumables, fuel, labor, and the time required to turn old tubing into a finished gate. He agrees to the price. She builds the gate back in her workshop using the corrected design, then hauls it to his ranch and hangs it on the existing posts. Before paying her, he checks the welds and brace, pulls the gate through its full swing, and closes it against the latch post. The bolt drops into the keeper without the latch end being lifted. Only after he has worked it himself does he hand her the check. Back at her own yard, the Oilfield pile is smaller and no longer tangled together. Usable sections are stacked by size. 2 more gate frames are clamped and partly welded inside the shop, and another finished frame is waiting near the door. While she marks the next set of cuts, a pickup she does not recognize turns in from the county road. Her phone starts ringing before the truck has even stopped, with another rancher asking whether she still has enough of that old pipe left to build 2 more gates.